The rain was hitting the windows hard that Thursday evening. She sat at the small kitchen table staring at her laptop screen, pretending to focus on work. But her mind was somewhere else entirely. Her heart was already racing before she even heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. 3 years. That's how long she'd been telling herself things would get better. That he was just stressed. That she needed to be more understanding. More patient. More something. Anything to explain away the knot in her stomach that appeared every time she heard his footsteps approaching. The front door opened with more force than necessary. She didn't look up immediately. Experience had taught her that sometimes the best strategy was to appear busy, but not too busy. Engaged, but not distracted. It was a delicate balance she'd learned to master over countless evenings just like this one. "You're home," she said, keeping her voice light and neutral. Not too cheerful, which might seem fake. Not too flat, which might seem unwelcoming. He didn't respond right away. Instead, she heard him drop his keys on the counter with a loud clatter. Then came the sound of the refrigerator opening and closing. A cabinet door slamming. These were the warning signs she'd become fluent in reading. The symphony of a bad day at work that was about to become her problem. "Why are there dishes in the sink?" His voice cut through the quiet apartment. She glanced over. 2 coffee mugs and a bowl. She'd planned to wash them after finishing her design project. "I was going to do them right after." "Right after what?" "You've been home all day." "I was working. The Henderson project deadline is tomorrow and—" "Everyone's always working," he interrupted, his voice rising. "But somehow everyone else manages to keep their house clean." It wasn't even his house. Well, technically it was both of theirs now, but she'd been the one paying most of the rent for the past year. Another thing she'd stopped mentioning because it always led to an argument about how he was between opportunities and how unsupportive she was being. She closed her laptop and stood up, walking to the sink. Her hands were steady as she turned on the water, even though her pulse was racing. This was the routine. Apologize through action. Stay quiet. Let the storm pass. But something felt different tonight. Maybe it was the conversation she'd had with her sister 2 weeks ago. The one where her sister had looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You know this isn't normal, right? You know you're walking on eggshells in your own home?" Or maybe it was the article she'd read last week about recognizing emotional abuse. Every single point on that list had felt like someone had been watching her life through a window. The constant criticism, the way he made her feel like she was always doing something wrong. How he'd slowly convinced her to stop seeing certain friends because they didn't understand their relationship. She scrubbed the dishes in silence while he paced behind her. She could feel his energy filling the room, pressing against her back like a physical weight. "And dinner? I suppose you didn't think about that either. There's chicken in the fridge. I can make something quick. I shouldn't have to come home and wait for food. Other people's girlfriends have dinner ready." Other people's girlfriends. He said it like she was failing some universal test that everyone else was passing, like there was a manual she hadn't read. She dried her hands on the towel, taking a slow breath. Normally, this is where she would apologize, where she would scramble to make things right, to smooth over his anger, to take responsibility for his bad mood. But tonight, something in her chest felt different. Tighter. Clearer. "I think you're overreacting," she said quietly. The words hung in the air for a moment. She immediately regretted them. What was she doing? Why was she pushing back now? His footsteps stopped. The apartment went completely silent except for the rain still drumming against the windows. "What did you just say to me?" She turned around slowly. He was standing in the middle of the kitchen, his face red, his jaw clenched. This was the look that usually made her backtrack immediately, made her soften her voice and apologize and try to de-escalate. "I just meant, it's just dishes. It's not that serious. Not that serious." His voice was getting louder now. "You're telling me how I should feel? You're telling me what's serious." He took a step closer to the counter between them. "I work all day while you sit here in your comfortable little work-from-home job, and I can't even come back to a clean house and a hot meal." Every word felt designed to make her feel small, ungrateful, lazy. It was a skill he'd perfected over the years. The ability to turn any situation into evidence of her inadequacy. But here's what he didn't know. For the past 2 weeks while he'd been at work, she hadn't just been designing logos and websites. She'd been making phone calls, researching apartments, moving money into a separate bank account he didn't know existed, watching videos from people who'd left relationships just like this one. Her sister had helped her see what she'd been too close to recognize. This wasn't love. This wasn't a partnership. This was control wrapped up in the language of concern. "I'm not trying to upset you," she said, keeping her voice even. "I just think we both need to calm down." Wrong thing to say. She knew it the moment the words left her mouth. His hand came down hard on the counter beside him. The impact was so sudden, so loud, that 3 glasses sitting near the edge toppled over. One shattered on the tile floor. The sound of breaking glass filling the small kitchen. She didn't scream. Didn't jump back. Didn't do any of the things she might have done a month ago. Instead, she looked at him. Really looked at him. And in that moment, standing there with his hand still pressed against the counter, his face twisted in rage over absolutely nothing, she saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. This was who he was. This anger wasn't going away. He wasn't going to change. And if she stayed, this moment right here, this broken glass on the floor, this rage over dirty dishes, this was going to be her life. Not someday. Not in theory. Right now. This was it. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Her heart was still racing, but it felt different now. Not panic. Something else. Something that felt almost like clarity. She looked at the broken glass on the floor, then back at him. He was breathing hard, probably expecting her to cry or apologize or clean up the mess. Instead, she walked past him. Didn't run. Didn't rush. Just walked with purpose toward the bedroom. "Where are you going?" he called after her. "Don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you." She didn't answer. She was done answering, done explaining, done managing his emotions at the expense of her own safety. In the bedroom, she got down on her knees beside the bed. Her hands found the suitcase she'd hidden there 5 days ago. The one she'd packed during her lunch breaks. The one she'd hidden under winter blankets he never touched. She pulled it out and set it on the bed. Her documents were already inside. Passport, birth certificate, social security card, the jewelry her grandmother had left her. Everything that mattered. Everything she couldn't replace. This was really happening. She was really doing this, and the strangest part, she felt completely calm. His footsteps were coming down the hallway now. Heavy, deliberate. She could hear him still talking, his voice carrying that edge that used to make her freeze in place. "You better not be ignoring me. We're not done talking about this." She unzipped the suitcase and did a quick mental inventory. Clothes for 2 weeks, toiletries, laptop charger, phone charger, the spare key to her sister's place that she'd gotten made last week. Everything was there. Everything she needed to disappear. He appeared in the doorway just as she was closing the suitcase. For a moment, he just stood there staring. His brain was clearly trying to process what his eyes were seeing. A packed suitcase. On the bed. In the middle of an argument about dishes. What is that? His voice had changed. Less anger now. More confusion. She didn't look at him. Just pulled the suitcase off the bed and set it on the floor. The wheels made a small clicking sound as they touched the hardwood. "What are you doing?" he asked again. Still standing in the doorway. Still not quite believing what he was seeing. She walked to the closet and grabbed her winter coat. It was October and the nights were getting cold. She'd need it. Then she picked up her purse from the dresser. Checked inside quickly. Wallet, keys, phone, good. "Hey, I'm talking to you." His voice was louder now, but there was something else in it too. Something she'd never heard before. Was it fear? Uncertainty? She finally looked at him, made eye contact for just a moment. And what she saw there almost made her pause. He looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't comprehend that his usual patterns weren't working, that his anger hadn't made her shrink down and apologize, but she couldn't afford to pause. Couldn't afford to let doubt creep in. She'd watched enough videos, read enough stories to know that this moment right here was the most dangerous one, the moment when she had to move forward without hesitation. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase and walked toward the door. He was blocking it. "Move," she said quietly. "Move? Are you serious right now? Where do you think you're going?" "Please move." "Over dishes? You're going to throw a tantrum over dishes?" She almost laughed. That's what he thought this was. A tantrum. Not 3 years of gradually losing herself. Not months of walking on eggshells. Not the dozens of times she'd cried herself to sleep while he snored beside her. Just a tan. Drum over dishes. This isn't about dishes, she said. Then what? What is this about? Talk to me. Talk to him. Like they were partners who solved problems together. Like she hadn't tried talking to him hundreds of times before. Like her words had ever mattered more than his moods. I need you to move, she repeated. He didn't move. Instead, he changed tactics. His face softened. His voice got quieter. Baby, come on. Let's just sit down and talk about this. I'm sorry I got upset. Work was really rough today and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair. There it was. The apology. It came out so smooth, so practiced. How many times had she heard some version of this exact speech? How many times had she believed it would be different next time? Move, she said again, her voice steady. I said I'm sorry. What more do you want? You want me to beg? Fine, I'm begging. Please don't do this. Don't leave over something stupid like this. Something stupid. Even his apology came with a criticism. Even now, he couldn't take full responsibility. It was still somehow about her overreacting. When he realized the soft approach wasn't working, his face changed again. Hardened. You know what? Fine, leave, see if I care. But you're being ridiculous. You're throwing away 3 years over nothing. And you know what? You'll be back. You always come back, those words. You always come back. They were meant to sound confident, but she heard the fear underneath them. He was starting to realize this was different. That something had shifted. She took a step forward. The suitcase rolled behind her. I'm not moving, he said, crossing his arms. Not until you calm down and we talk like adults. Like adults. As if she were a child throwing a fit instead of a woman making the hardest decision of her life. She pulled out her phone with her free hand. Kept her eyes on him as she unlocked it. Her finger hovered over the screen. What are you doing? He asked. If you don't move in the next 10 seconds, I'm calling the police. His eyes widened. The police? Are you insane? I didn't do anything. 9 seconds. You're being crazy right now. Absolutely crazy. 8 seconds. Fine. He stepped aside, throwing his hands up. Go. Run away like you always do when things get hard. But don't come crying to me when you realize you made a mistake. She walked past him, her shoulder almost brushing his chest. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every step felt surreal, like she was watching herself from somewhere outside her body, down the hallway, past the living room where they'd watched movies together, past the kitchen where broken glass still lay on the floor, past the front door that she'd walked through thousands of times. She was really leaving. He followed her, still talking. Where are you even going to go? Your sister's place? Good luck with that. She never liked me anyway. Probably been filling your head with nonsense. She opened the front door. The rain had lightened to a drizzle, but the air was cold and damp. Her car was parked right there in the driveway. 20 feet away. Might as well have been 20 miles. You'll be back by tomorrow, he called from the doorway. You'll realize you're being dramatic and you'll be back. She popped the trunk and lifted her suitcase inside. It was heavier than she remembered. Or maybe her arms were shaking now that the adrenaline was really kicking in. This is stupid. His voice was louder now, carrying across the quiet neighborhood. You're being stupid. She closed the trunk and walked to the driver's side door. Her hands were definitely shaking now as she tried to get the key in the lock. Come on, the door opened. She slid inside, started the engine. The dashboard lights glowed in the darkness. He was standing on the front porch now, rain beginning to soak his shirt. Just standing there watching. His face was a mix of anger and something else. Disbelief, maybe. Like he still couldn't quite process that this was actually happening. She put the car in reverse. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. As she backed out of the driveway, she looked at him one more time. Standing there in the rain, looking smaller somehow than he'd looked just 10 minutes ago. 8 minutes. That's all it had been from the moment he slammed the counter to the moment she drove away. 8 minutes to change her entire life. She shifted into drive and pressed the gas pedal. The car moved forward, away from the house, away from him, away from 3 years of making herself smaller so he could feel bigger. Her phone started ringing almost immediately. His name flashed on the screen. She ignored it. It rang again, and again. At the first stoplight, she blocked his number. Her hands were still shaking, but she managed to do it. Then she opened her messages and typed quickly to her sister. I'm on my way. I did it, I really did it. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, I'm so proud of you. Drive safe. I'll be waiting. The light turned green. She drove through the empty streets, rain starting to come down harder again. Every mile felt like breathing room. Like space she'd been craving without even realizing it. She kept checking the rearview mirror. Part of her expected to see his car following her, but the street behind her stayed empty. 15 minutes later, she pulled into her sister's driveway. The porch light was already on. Before she'd even turned off the engine, the front door opened. Her sister ran out into the rain, not caring that she was getting soaked. She pulled open the car door and wrapped her arms around her before she'd even fully stepped out. You did it, her sister whispered. You really did it. I'm so proud of you. And that's when she finally let herself cry, standing in the rain in her sister's driveway, suitcase still in the trunk. 3 years of pain finally pouring out of her. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She left a man who'd spent years making her feel worthless, and she'd done it in 8 minutes flat, leaving him standing shocked in the doorway. For the first time in 3 years, she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. And somehow that felt like freedom. Her sister helped her carry the suitcase inside. The house was warm and smelled like vanilla candles. Safe. That's what it felt like. Safe. Let me get you a towel, her sister said, already heading toward the bathroom. You're soaked. She stood in the entryway, dripping rain onto the hardwood floor, and suddenly felt completely exhausted, like someone had unplugged whatever was keeping her going. Her legs felt weak. Her hands were still trembling. Her sister came back with 2 towels and wrapped one around her shoulders. Come on, let's get you into some dry clothes. They went to the guest room. It was small but cozy, with a queen bed covered in a blue quilt and a reading lamp on the nightstand. This was where she'd be sleeping tonight, not in the apartment she'd shared with him, not listening to him breathe beside her, not wondering if tomorrow would be a good day or a bad day. I can't believe I did that, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can, her sister replied, pulling out fresh towels from the closet. I've been waiting for you to see what I saw, what everyone who loves you has been seeing. She changed into dry clothes, her wet ones left in a pile on the floor. Even that felt strange. Usually she would have immediately put them in the hamper, made sure everything was tidy, but right now she couldn't find it in herself to care about a pile of wet clothes. When she came out of the bedroom, her sister had made tea. 2 steaming mugs sat on the coffee table in the living room. They sat down on the couch together, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then her phone buzzed, and buzzed again, and again. He's calling from a different number, her sister said, glancing at the screen. Don't answer it. She didn't, but her stomach twisted anyway. She knew what those calls meant. The messages that would follow. The escalation. Sure enough, texts started coming through. At first they were apologies. Baby, please call me back. I'm sorry. I overreacted. I love you. We can work through this. Just come home and we'll talk. Then they shifted. You're really going to throw away everything we built? After everything I've done for you? You're making a huge mistake. Her sister gently took the phone from her hands. Do you want me to block these numbers too? She nodded. She couldn't look at them anymore. Each message felt like it was pulling her back, making her doubt herself, making her wonder if she was overreacting, if she should just go back and try harder. Talk to me, her sister said softly. What are you feeling right now? I don't know. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. Everything, nothing. I feel like I should feel relieved, but I just feel scared. That's normal, is it? I mean, I left him. I should feel happy, right, Free? But instead, I just keep thinking about what if I made a mistake? What if I'm the problem? What if he's right and I'm being dramatic? Her sister set down her own mug and turned to face her fully. Listen to me. You are not being dramatic. Do you know what you told me 2 weeks ago? You said you'd started timing your showers because if you took too long, he'd complain about the water bill. You said you stopped listening to music you liked because he said it was annoying. You told me you asked his permission before buying a coffee. She felt tears starting again. I know all of that. But when I'm away from him, it's like I can't remember why it was so bad. My brain just keeps showing me the good times. That's what happens. That's how it works. Her sister reached over and squeezed her hand. Your brain is trying to protect you from pain by remembering the good parts. But you need to remember tonight. Remember how you felt when he slammed that. Remember the fear. She did remember. The sound of breaking glass, the look in his eyes, the way her whole body had tensed up, preparing for what might come next. "What if he shows up here?" she asked quietly. "He doesn't know where I live. Remember, you never gave him my address. And tomorrow we're going to get a restraining order. We're going to document everything. Every text, every call, every incident you can remember. He's going to think I'm crazy. Who cares what he thinks? He doesn't get a vote anymore." That sentence hit her hard. He doesn't get a vote anymore. For 3 years, his opinion had been the only one that mattered. What he thought about her clothes, her friends, her work, her family, everything had been filtered through the lens of whether it would upset him. They stayed up late that night talking. Her sister helped her make a list of things she needed to do. Cancel the joint credit card, change her passwords, set up mail forwarding, find a new apartment. It was overwhelming, but having a plan made it feel less impossible. Around midnight, her sister went to bed, but she couldn't sleep. She lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She kept replaying the evening, wondering if she could have handled it differently. Wondering if she should have tried to explain better. Wondering if he was right and she was throwing away something good over one bad moment. But then she made herself remember other moments. The time he'd yelled at her in front of his friends for telling a story wrong. The time he'd thrown her phone across the room during an argument. The time he'd told her she was lucky to have him because no one else would put up with her. One bad moment. That's what he'd want her to believe. But it wasn't one moment. It was hundreds of moments stretched across 3 years, each one slowly eroding her sense of self. Her phone buzzed again. A new number. She almost didn't look, but curiosity got the better of her. "I can't believe you're doing this to us, after everything we've been through. You're selfish." She turned the phone face down on the nightstand. He was trying everything now. Guilt, shame, whatever would work to get her to respond. Her sister had warned her about this. The escalation that happens when someone loses control, how they'll cycle through every tactic they know. Anger, apologies, promises, threats, guilt. Around and around until they find something that works. But nothing was going to work this time. She had to keep reminding herself of that. Around 2 in the morning, she finally fell asleep. But it was restless, full of dreams where she was packing and unpacking the same suitcase over and over, where she was trying to leave but couldn't find the door, where he was following her but she couldn't run. She woke up at 6, disoriented and exhausted. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she remembered. Her sister's house. She'd left. She'd really left. She got up and walked to the kitchen. Her sister was already there making coffee. "Morning," her sister said gently. "How'd you sleep?" "Not great." "That's normal too. It's going to take time." They sat together at the kitchen table, drinking coffee as the sun came up. Her sister had to go to work, but she'd already arranged to take a long lunch so they could go to the courthouse together. "Are you going to be okay here alone?" her sister asked. She wanted to say yes. Wanted to be brave and strong and completely fine. But the truth was she was terrified. "I don't know. That's okay. You don't have to know. You just have to take it 1 hour at a time." Her sister grabbed a notebook and pen from the counter. "While I'm gone, I want you to start writing everything down. Every incident you remember. Dates if you can remember them. What he said, what he did. All of it." The thought of reliving all those moments made her stomach turn. But she nodded. "Okay." After her sister left for work, the house felt too quiet. She tried to distract herself with TV, but couldn't focus. Her mind kept drifting back to him. What was he doing right now? Was he angry, sad, planning something? She picked up the notebook and stared at the blank page. Where did she even start? She started with last night. Wrote down what happened with the dishes, the broken glass, his hand slamming the counter. Then she went backward. Last week when he'd criticized her work in front of her boss during a video call. Last month when he'd accused her of cheating because she'd smiled at a cashier. 6 months ago, when he'd told her she was getting fat and needed to watch what she ate. The list grew longer, page after page, incident after incident, some big, some small, all of them adding up to a pattern she'd been too close to see. By the time her sister came home for lunch, she'd filled 15 pages. "I didn't realize," she said, her voice shaking as she showed her sister the notebook. "I didn't realize how much there was. How bad it was." Her sister read through the pages, her face getting more and more serious. "This is important. This is evidence. This is proof that you're not crazy, you're not dramatic, and you didn't overreact. They went to the courthouse that afternoon, filed for a restraining order. She had to tell a stranger all the things she'd written down, had to say out loud all the ways she'd been hurt and scared and controlled. It was humiliating, exhausting, but necessary. When they got back to the house, she felt completely drained. They ordered pizza for dinner and watched old comedy shows, trying to find some normalcy in a day that felt anything but normal. That night before bed, her sister hugged her tight. "You did good today. Really good. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you're being so brave." "I don't feel brave. I feel like a mess. Brave people are usually scared. That's what makes it brave." She went to bed that second night feeling slightly less terrified than the first. She was still scared. Still doubting herself. Still wondering if she'd made the right choice, but she was also still here. Still safe. Still free. And tomorrow she'd wake up and do it all over again. One day at a time. 1 hour at a time, if that's what it took. She'd escaped. And now she just had to learn how to stay gone. A week had passed since she left. 7 days that felt like both a lifetime and no time at all. She was still at her sister's house, sleeping in the guest room, trying to figure out what came next. The restraining order had been granted. That should have made her feel safer. Instead, it just made everything feel more real, more final. There was no going back now. Not that she wanted to. At least most of the time she didn't want to. Her phone had stayed quiet for exactly 3 days. She'd blocked 6 different numbers. And apparently he'd finally given up trying to reach her directly. That's when he started getting creative. First, mutual friends began reaching out. People she hadn't heard from in months suddenly wanted to check in and see how she was doing. One of his co-workers sent her a long message about how he was devastated, how he couldn't eat or sleep, how he was so confused about what happened. Could she please just call him? Just talk to him. He deserved that much, didn't he? She didn't respond. Her sister had warned her about this. The flying monkeys, they called them. People he'd send to plead his case because his own words weren't working anymore. Then came the message from her old college friend. They'd been close once before he'd slowly convinced her that this friend was too negative and not good for her mental health. "Hey, I ran into him at the coffee shop. He seems really upset. He said you left without explaining anything. I know it's none of my business, but he seems like he really loves you. Maybe you guys could try counseling." She stared at that message for a long time. How did he make himself the victim so easily? How did he convince people that she was the one who'd left without explanation, when she'd spent 3 years trying to explain her feelings only to be told she was too sensitive? She typed and deleted responses for 10 minutes before finally settling on, "There's more to the story than he's telling you. But I appreciate your concern." Short, simple, not defensive. Not explaining herself to someone who hadn't bothered to ask her side. What bothered her most was that some of these friends believed him, or at least gave him the benefit of the doubt. They'd known her for years, but somehow his version of events was the one that made sense to them. Her sister said it was because he was good at playing the victim. That people who haven't experienced this kind of relationship don't understand how someone can seem so normal, so charming, so hurt on the outside while being completely different behind closed doors. On day 8, he showed up at her work. She worked from home most days, but Wednesdays she went into the office for team meetings. She was walking to her car after lunch when she saw him leaning against the hood, arms crossed, looking like he'd been waiting. Her heart dropped straight into her stomach. How did he know she'd be here? Had he been watching her?
Following her?
"We need to talk," he said as she approached. She stopped about 10 feet away. People were walking past in the parking lot. She wasn't alone. That was good. Stay in public spaces. That's what the woman at the domestic violence helpline had told her. "You're violating the restraining order," she said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "I don't care about that piece of paper. I care about us, about our relationship. There is no us anymore. You need to leave. 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes to explain." "No. You owe me that much." There it was. The guilt. The obligation. "You owe me." How many times had she heard those words? How many times had she done things she didn't want to do because she owed him? "I don't owe you anything. Leave now or I'm calling the police." His face changed. The sad, pleading expression shifted into something harder. "You're really going to do this? Throw away 3 years because of one bad day? One bad day." That's what he'd reduced everything to. One bad day. She pulled out her phone and started dialing. He held up his hands in surrender and backed away. Fine. Call them. Let them see how crazy you're being. Let them see that I just wanted to talk to my girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend, she corrected. He got in his car and drove away, but not before staring at her through the windshield for a long, uncomfortable moment, like he was trying to memorize her face, or maybe intimidate her. She couldn't tell which. She reported the violation, filed another police report, added it to the growing documentation of everything he was doing. The officer who took her statement said these things tend to escalate before they get better, that she needed to be careful, as if she wasn't already being careful, as if she wasn't already jumping at every sound and checking over her shoulder constantly. That night she started therapy. Her sister had found her a therapist who specialized in relationship trauma. The woman's name was Dr. Chen, and she had kind eyes and a calm voice. "Tell me what brings you here," Dr. Chen said. She'd told the story so many times now, to her sister, to the police, to the judge. Each time felt like picking at a wound that wasn't healing, but she told it again. Started with the night she left and worked backward. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting. When she finished, the therapist said something that made her start crying. "That must have been terrifying. You were very brave." No one had said that to her yet. Everyone had focused on whether she was safe now, whether she had a plan, whether she was documenting everything. But no one had acknowledged how scary it was to live through. "I don't feel brave," she admitted. "I feel like a failure. Like if I'd been stronger or smarter or better somehow, this wouldn't have happened." That's what trauma does. It makes you blame yourself for someone else's choices. But his behavior wasn't your fault. Nothing you did or didn't do caused him to treat you that way. They talked for the full hour. Dr. Chen explained things like gaslighting, love bombing, trauma bonding, gave names to patterns she'd experienced but couldn't articulate. "The hardest part for most people," Dr. Chen said near the end, "is understanding that the person who hurt them isn't going to have some big realization and change. He's not going to suddenly understand what he did wrong and apologize. He genuinely believes his version of events. So he really thinks I'm the bad guy? That I just left for no reason? Most likely, yes. In his mind, he's the victim. You're the one who abandoned him. That's why it's so important that you don't engage with him. Don't try to make him understand. Don't try to get closure from him. You have to find that closure yourself." That was hard to accept. She'd spent 3 years trying to make him understand her, trying to communicate better, trying to be clearer, and now she was supposed to just accept that he'd never get it? But maybe that was the point. Maybe she'd been trying to get understanding from someone who was incapable of giving it. Over the next few days, more people reached out. His mother sent her a Facebook message asking what she'd done to her son. An old friend from his high school suggested maybe she was going through something and wasn't thinking clearly. Each message felt like a little cut, proof that he was out there, telling his version, making himself the victim, and people were believing it. "Let them believe it," her sister said when she showed her the messages. "The people who matter know the truth. And the people who believe him without asking your side aren't people you need in your life anyway." She'd lost friends through this, people she'd thought would have her back. But she'd also discovered who her real friends were. The ones who checked in without judgment, who offered help without asking for the whole story, who just showed up with coffee and let her be quiet when she needed to be. At her second therapy session, Dr. Chen gave her homework. She was supposed to make 2 lists. One list of red flags she'd missed or ignored. Another list of what a healthy relationship should look like. The red flag list came easily. Too easily. How he'd moved the relationship fast at the beginning. Love bombing, Dr. Chen had called it. Telling her he loved her after 2 weeks. Talking about their future together before they'd even had their first fight. How he'd slowly isolated her. First just suggesting she spend more time with him instead of her friends, then pointing out little flaws in her friends until she started avoiding them. Eventually, she'd stop making plans with anyone because it was easier than dealing with his mood afterward. How he'd criticized her appearance while claiming it was because he cared about her health. Comments about her weight, her clothes, her hair, always framed as concern but delivered in a way that made her feel ugly and unlovable. How he'd controlled the money. Even though she made more than him, he'd convinced her they should have a joint account that he managed. For convenience, he'd said, to make things easier. She hadn't noticed how the balance kept getting lower until she'd opened that separate account. How he'd made her responsible for his emotions. If he was angry, it was because of something she did. If he was sad, she wasn't supporting him enough. His feelings were always her responsibility to fix. The list went on and on. By the time she finished, she'd filled 3 pages. The healthy relationship list was harder. She'd been with him since she was 29. Before that, she'd had a few relationships, but nothing serious. What did healthy even look like? She wrote down things that felt obvious, but that she'd never experienced. Respect, trust, equal partnership, support for her goals, friends who knew both of them, disagreements that didn't end in insults or intimidation. Looking at the 2 lists side by side was sobering. She'd settled for so much less than she deserved, and she'd convinced herself it was love. 2 weeks after she left, she went apartment hunting. She needed her own space. Her sister had been amazing, but she couldn't stay in the guest room forever. She found a small 1-bedroom across town. Different neighborhood. New area he didn't know. She signed the lease the same day. Moving day felt like another huge step. Her sister helped her buy basic furniture. They spent the whole day setting up her new place. Her space, where she made all the decisions about what went where and how things looked. That first night alone in her new apartment was strange. Quiet. But not the scary kind of quiet she'd lived in before, where silence meant he was upset about something. This was peaceful quiet, safe quiet. She made tea and sat on her new couch and just breathed. No one was going to walk through that door and ruin this moment. No one was going to criticize how she'd arranged the furniture or complain about what she'd made for dinner. For the first time in 3 years, she was completely, totally alone. And it felt like freedom. 3 months had passed since the night she left. 90 days that had somehow felt both endless and impossibly fast. She was sitting in her apartment, the one she'd chosen by herself, decorated by herself, paid for with money from an account he'd never touched. The walls were painted a soft sage green. He would have hated it, would have said it was too dark or too feminine or too something, but she loved it. And that was all that mattered now. She'd started painting again. That was the biggest surprise. There was an easel set up by the window, paint-stained brushes in a jar, canvases in various stages of completion leaning against the wall. She'd forgotten how much she loved painting. He'd always said it was a waste of time, that she should focus on her real job, the one that actually made money. Now she painted every Sunday morning. It wasn't about being good at it. It was about the feeling of creating something that was entirely hers. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from her sister. "Coffee tomorrow? Want to hear about my disaster date last night?" She smiled and typed back a yes. Her relationship with her sister had gotten stronger. They talked almost every day now. Made plans without having to check with anyone else first. Simple things that used to feel complicated were easy again. Therapy was helping. Dr. Chen had explained that healing wasn't linear. Some days she felt strong and confident. Other days she cried over commercials and questioned every decision she'd ever made. Both were normal, apparently. The hardest days were the ones when she missed him. Not the him from the last year, but the him from the beginning. The charming, attentive, sweet version who'd made her feel special. Dr. Chen said that was normal too. Said that version had been real in a way, but it was only one part of a complicated whole. "You're not missing him," Dr. Chen had explained. "You're grieving the person you thought he was, the relationship you hoped it would become. That's different from actually wanting to go back." She joined a support group. Every Tuesday night, she sat in a circle with 8 other women who'd left similar relationships. They ranged in age from 23 to 61. Different stories, different circumstances, but the same core patterns underneath. Listening to their stories had been eye-opening. She realized how textbook her situation had been. The same tactics, the same progression, the same excuses she'd made for him, they'd made for their partners too. One woman had been married for 15 years before she left. Another had only been dating her boyfriend for 6 months when she recognized the signs and got out. There was no timeline that made it easier or harder. They were all just trying to rebuild. The group had become a lifeline. On bad days when she doubted herself, she could text the group chat and someone would remind her why she left. They'd celebrate small victories together. First day without crying. First date with someone new. First time running into their ex without having a panic attack. Work had gotten better too. Without the constant anxiety of going home, she'd been able to focus more. Her designs had improved. Her boss had noticed and given her a raise. She was saving money for the first time in years because she wasn't covering someone else's expenses. She'd started exercising again, not because anyone told her she should, but because it made her feel good. She joined a hiking group and spent Saturday mornings on trails with people who just wanted to walk and talk and enjoy nature. No judgment, no criticism, just casual friendship. The restraining order was still in place. He'd violated it twice more after that day in the parking lot. Once by showing up at her old gym. Once by sending flowers to her workplace with a card that said, "I'll always love you." Each time she'd documented it. Each time it had reinforced that leaving was the right choice. Because the man who claimed to love her kept disrespecting her clearly stated boundaries. That wasn't love. That was control. The violation reports had consequences. He'd had to appear in court. The restraining order was extended. She didn't know all the details and didn't want to. She just knew he'd finally stopped trying to contact her about 6 weeks ago. The silence was both relieving and unsettling. Part of her waited for the next shoe to drop. But weeks passed and nothing happened. Maybe he'd finally accepted it was over. Or maybe he'd just found someone new to focus his attention on. She tried not to think about that possibility too much. One afternoon, she ran into him at a coffee shop downtown. She'd been meeting a friend from the hiking group when she saw him in line. Her first instinct was to leave, run, hide. All the old fear responses kicked in immediately. But then something strange happened. She took a breath, reminded herself where she was. Public place, daytime, other people around, and more importantly, she wasn't the same person she'd been 3 months ago. She stayed, ordered her coffee, and when he turned around and saw her, she watched his face closely. He looked surprised, then pleased, like this was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. He started to walk toward her, but she held up her hand in a clear stop gesture. "Don't," she said simply. He stopped, stood there holding his coffee, looking uncertain. This was the moment she'd been dreading and somehow also needed. To see him and realize she felt nothing, not love, not hate, not fear, just nothing. He was just a person, someone she used to know, someone who'd hurt her, but someone who had no power over her anymore. "I just wanted to say," he started. "I don't want to hear it," she interrupted. Her voice was calm, steady. "We have nothing to say to each other. Please leave me alone." She turned away before he could respond, picked up her coffee when the barista called her name, walked to the table where her friend was waiting. Didn't look back. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she was smiling. Because she'd done it. She'd seen him and hadn't fallen apart, hadn't gotten pulled back into his orbit, had simply existed in the same space as him and then chosen to walk away. Later that night, she wrote in the journal Dr. Chen had suggested she keep. She wrote about the coffee shop encounter, about how different it felt from what she'd imagined. She'd built him up so big in her mind that seeing him looking ordinary, uncertain, almost small, was jarring. He wasn't some all-powerful figure who controlled her life anymore. He was just a guy with issues he refused to address, who'd tried to make those issues her responsibility, and she'd finally stopped accepting that responsibility. She thought about the night she left. That moment when she'd seen the suitcase under the bed and known she had to go right then. Not tomorrow. Not next week, right that second at 8 minutes. That's all it had taken to change everything. If she'd hesitated, she might have talked herself out of it. Might have convinced herself to give him one more chance. Might have spent another 3 years walking on eggshells and losing herself piece by piece. But she hadn't hesitated. And that decision, made in a moment of clarity while glass shattered on the kitchen floor, had saved her. She wrote in her journal, "Today I saw him and felt nothing. Not love, not hate, not fear, just indifference. I think that's what healing looks like. Not forgetting what happened, but no longer letting it define my present." Dr. Chen had told her that trauma work isn't about erasing what happened. It's about integrating it into your story without letting it write your future. She was starting to understand what that meant. The person she'd been 3 months ago scrambling to please him and avoid his anger felt like a stranger now. She had compassion for that version of herself. She'd been doing the best she could with the tools she had, but she was different now, stronger, clearer. She'd learned to recognize red flags, not just in romantic relationships, but in all areas of life. People who made her feel bad for having boundaries. People who criticized her under the guise of helping. people whose problems always seemed to become her responsibility. She'd learned to trust her instincts again. That feeling in her gut that something was wrong, that was information. That was her body protecting her. She wouldn't ignore it anymore. She'd learned that leaving was possible. That's what the support group had taught her more than anything. Every woman in that circle had reached a point where leaving seemed impossible, and yet they'd all done it. Some had support systems, some didn't. Some had money saved, some left with nothing, but they'd all found a way. Her friend from the hiking group had asked her recently if she was ready to date again. The question had caught her off guard. "I don't know," she'd answered honestly. "I'm not sure I trust my judgment yet." "That's fair," her friend had said. "But when you're ready, you'll know what to look for now. You'll see the red flags earlier. You'll know what you deserve." What she deserved. That was still a work in progress. Some days she believed she deserved good things. Other days she still heard his voice in her head telling her she was difficult, too sensitive, not worth the effort. But those voices were getting quieter, replaced by her own voice, and her therapist's voice, and her sister's voice, and the voices of all the women in her support group who reminded her weekly that she was strong and capable and worthy of respect. She looked around her apartment, at the life she was building from scratch. It wasn't perfect. She still had days when she cried, days when she felt lonely, days when the weight of everything that had happened felt too heavy. But she also had days where she laughed until her stomach hurt, days where she felt proud of herself, days where she did exactly what she wanted without checking with anyone else first, days where she remembered what peace felt like. The girl who'd left that apartment 3 months ago, suitcase in hand, heart pounding, had been terrified of what came next. She'd had no idea if she was making the right choice. No guarantee things would get better, but things had gotten better. Not easy, not perfect, but better. And as she sat there in her sage green living room, paint under her fingernails, tea getting cold on the table beside her, she realized something profound. She'd escaped. Not just physically by walking out that door, but mentally and emotionally too. She'd escaped the version of herself that believed she deserved to be treated that way. The version that made herself small to make someone else comfortable. The version that thought love was supposed to hurt. He'd been shocked when she left. Genuinely couldn't believe she'd do it, because he'd underestimated her. Thought she was too weak, too dependent, too afraid to walk away. But he'd been wrong. And the look on his face when she'd walked past him with that suitcase, when he'd realized she was really leaving, that she wasn't going to stop or explain or apologize, that was the moment his power over her had ended. She picked up her phone and typed a message to the support group chat. 3 months today. Still standing. Still growing. Thank you all for being here. The responses came quickly, hearts and encouraging words and celebrations of how far she'd come. These women understood. They'd walked this path too. She set her phone down and looked at the canvas on her easel. A painting she'd been working on for weeks. Abstract colors blending together, dark at the bottom, getting lighter toward the top. It wasn't finished yet, but it was becoming something beautiful, just like her. And tomorrow she'd wake up in her own apartment, make her own decisions, live her own life. Without fear, without permission, without someone telling her who she should be. She'd walked out of that door 3 months ago with no idea what freedom would feel like. Now she knew. It felt like painting on Sunday mornings, like hiking with friends, like sage green walls, like finally being able to breathe. It felt like coming home to herself.